Hello, good day to you. Today, I'm going to present to you about free trade. Why it is called free trade? Does free trade is really a free trade? Is it free trade is a fair? We are going to touch on the historical evolution of free trade, the key elements and features of free trade, as well as the debates and critics on the idea of free trade regime. So let's check it out. Okay, now we are going to discuss about what is free trade. The presentation will cover on definition, evolution of ideas or historical background on the ideas of free trade, some characteristics or features of free trade agreements, and some critiques and debates on free trade. Alright, now we are going to discuss some definitions of free trade. So here there's three direct or understandable definitions on free trade. In general, free trade allows free flow of goods, capital, and labor forces across the trading partners or the trading blocks or the trading areas, and also tend to eliminate discrimination against import and exports and to reduce regulations and restrictions. So, the idea of free trade existed since 18th century, especially from Britain. Why Britain? Because Britain was the economic hegemon during that time, and they are the one that initiated the so-called Industrial Revolution. Scholars like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and John Stuart Mills among the propagators of free trade ideas. Adam Smith was a strong advocate of free trade. He rejects the idea of state intervention and against any restriction of imports and exports of commodities. He also against the state protectionist policy to secure local manufacturers. David Ricardo was best known for the idea of comparative advantage, which is the idea of the best, expert, and efficiently produced goods to be exchanged between producing countries. Ricardo also rejected the Corn Laws, which is a protective tariff on imported goods in favor of local domestic producers. John Stuart Mills believes in laissez-faire or free and flow movement of capital and labor. Mills supported free trade, which also associated with free market, in which prices of goods and services are determined by the open market forces, and also the laws and forces of supply and demand are free from any intervention by a government. John Maynard Keynes is influential economist in 20th century and also critical towards the idea of less role of non-intervention of state. During the Great Depressions in 1931, Keynes believed that import tariffs could help in boosting aggregate output and employment in order to recover the state's economy. He believes that states should be able to undertake domestic policies in controlling inflation, unemployment, and encouraging economic growth. Last but not least, Joseph Stiglitz is known for a globalization expert, and he also critical towards the management of globalization, laissez-faire economies, and international institutions such as IMF or International Monetary Fund and World Bank. Alright, now we are going to discuss some features or key elements of free trade. It consists 6 elements, which is free market, trade barriers reduction, tariff elimination, rejects monopoly, common trade policy and agreement, and unregulated access to market and information. First is on free market. Free market means that there is a less intervention of states in terms of regulations and restriction in blocking or obstructing the flows of labor, capital, goods, and services. Reduction of trade barriers mostly are non-tariff, such as license, quotas, and embargoes that restricts imports and exports of goods and services. Eliminating tariffs or tax imports or exports between sovereign states helps in propagating an active free trade regime. Free trade regime also rejects monopoly or a single producers that tend to control or to monopolize the market. Free trade also consists of common trade policy and agreement to ensure that the free trade system will work efficiently. There are numbers of free trade agreements signed and free trade areas established, especially in Southeast Asia, North America, and Europe. And last but not least is that unregulated access to market and information, which means all countries have information access towards understanding the common conditions of the markets for them to explore available opportunities for them to inherit. So, this is a free trade agreement is all about. It is an international agreement between two or more countries to reduce or remove trade barriers and bring closer economic integration. The difference between FTA and WTO, or the World Trade Organization, is that WTO is an international organization which presets regulations of trade in goods, services, and intellectual property between participating countries by providing a framework for negotiating trade agreements. Malaysia has already signed 7 bilateral FTAs with Japan, Pakistan, India, New Zealand, Chile, and Turkey, while at the ASEAN level, 6 regional FTAs together with ASEAN, China, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India. Now we are going to enter to the last part of presentation, which is some debates and critiques on free trade regime. How free is free trade? Well, certainly there's some regulations and restriction imposed in order to control the abundance of import or export, to ensure that to protect the local or domestic production or industry. So, 3 main ideologies or theories or conceptions or policy taken by country, even by liberal countries such as protectionism, nationalism, and mercantilism, is still imposed in a modern globalized world. Thus, free trade is a fair trade? Well, fair trade concerns more on the people's welfare, security, and how to improve their lifestyle. However, some arguments say that free trade only concerns on their greedy wealth accumulation compared to secure the wealth of the people or the consumers. Free trade also somehow affected or at least exploited the least developed countries, which they are under advantage or didn't benefit at all from free trade system. This is because free trade players such as the multinational corporations or MNCs usually engage directly with the political rulers or the ruling regime, which is mostly ruled authoritatively, in order to exploit the natural resources and the materials and also the labor forces that offers by the least. As a conclusion, of course, free trade has advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons. I hope that this presentation helps to give a brief introduction and understanding on what is free trade. Thank you. Wassalam.